A March afternoon in Millbrook, Kentucky. Elena Whitford sat in her wheelchair on a dirt slope before an old sunflower farm, alone. Her assistant had sprinted off for an umbrella when the sky broke open. The wheels began to slip on wet earth. The handbrake had felt loose since morning, but she had not called anyone to fix it. The chair lurched downhill, and below her, a pickup truck was turning onto the road. Elena did not scream. She closed her eyes. Then a muddy hand clamped the back bar and dragged her to a stop. "Are you all right?" Caleb Hart had crossed the sunflower rows just in time. He did not know who she was. He only saw a woman in a dark office suit about to pitch into the road. He knelt one knee into the mud, tested the brake with a quick squeeze, and spoke plainly. "Brakes shot. Let me carry you up to the porch so you can get out of the rain." "All right?" Elena, who had spent her adult life hating being lifted, pitied, looked at like a fragile thing, nodded without hesitation for the first time in years. In the moment he lifted her, she realized something that unsettled her more than the fall itself. In the 7 years since the accident, no one had ever asked her before touching her. They had only pushed, raised, guided, as if she were an object in transit, a piece of expensive furniture that needed to be moved from one meeting room to another. This man had asked, and he had waited for her answer. He had held his body still and listened for the word before he moved. Caleb set her down on a wooden chair on the porch, as carefully as he would set down an instrument. Ruby came running out of the house, a red-colored pencil still in her hand, and stared at the strange woman without fear. The child only asked, "Does it hurt?" Elena, who had spent 7 years training her face to give nothing away in boardrooms full of men twice her age, suddenly did not know how to answer a 7-year-old with a red pencil. Caleb came back with a dry towel and a mug of hot tea, dark and strong, the kind of tea people drank in farmhouses where the kettle stayed on the stove all afternoon. He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she came from. He did not ask why a woman in a wheelchair had been sitting alone in the middle of a field in the rain. He only said, "This rain should let up in about an hour. You sit. I'll take the chair to the shed and fix the brake." Then he carried the wheelchair into the barn and left her alone with Ruby on the porch. Ruby sat on the step beside Elena and opened her sketchbook, the cover creased and soft from use. Inside were pencil portraits of a brown-haired woman laughing, again and again, drawn from slightly different angles, as though the child were trying to remember every face her mother had ever made. The girl explained softly, "My mom had cancer. Dad says she went far away, but she's still here." She pointed to her own chest. Elena, who had not cried in front of anyone since her husband's funeral 7 years earlier, felt her eyes burn. She bit the inside of her lip and turned her face away toward the field. Caleb came back with oil on his hands and a streak of grease along the underside of his forearm. "Brakes done. I replaced the left cable too. It was almost worn through. You've got maybe a month before the right one goes." Elena asked him how much. He looked at her, genuinely confused, as if she had spoken in a different language. "How much for what? You got stuck on my land in the rain. Nobody charges a person for fixing a chair after an accident." She did not know how to answer. In her world, every kindness came with a price tag, a favor to be returned, an expectation folded neatly inside the gift. Her assistant finally found her, hurrying up the slope with an umbrella held out in one hand and a phone already pressed to her ear. She was breathless and apologetic all at once. "Miss Whitford, the car is waiting on the main road. I am so sorry it took this long." Caleb went still. The name Whitford was the same name printed on every offer letter his neighbors had been signing, the same name behind the surveyors who had been walking his property line for 6 months, the same company that had been trying to buy out every acre in Millbrook. He looked at Elena. His eyes changed for a half-second. Not angry. Only understanding. Elena felt the change. She spoke fast, before he could close the door inside him. "I haven't decided anything about your land. I came down here to see it myself. I don't trust the reports my office sends me." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then come back tomorrow. Ruby wants to show you the sunflower rows. Nothing's blooming yet, but the seedlings are up." Elena froze in her chair. No one in Chicago had ever invited her back after learning her last name. They had only ever wanted her to sign or to leave. When the black sedan pulled away from the dirt road, Ruby stood on the porch and waved with her whole arm, the way children wave to a train. Elena found herself waving back through the rain-streaked window. For the first time in 7 years, she waved at a child, without feeling like she was performing the role of a normal woman. Back at her hotel in Louisville that night, Elena could not sleep. She had pulled Ruby's drawing from her coat pocket and set it on the bedside lampstand. Where the light caught the blue of her drawn eyes, she poured a glass of water she did not drink. Finally, after an hour of staring at the ceiling, she sat up and wheeled herself over to the desk. She opened the Millbrook acquisition file again and spread the pages across the desk. Among the 47 landowners scheduled for displacement, one line caught her eye. Hart, C. 12 acres organic sunflowers and corn, offer rejected 3 times. She read each rejection carefully. First offer, $340,000, refused. Second offer, $480,000, refused. Third offer, $620,000, refused, with a handwritten note attached. It is not about the money. My wife is buried here. Elena called Preston Vale, her chief operating officer, and asked why the note had not been in her executive summary. Preston answered smoothly, the way he always answered difficult questions. That landowner is an outlier. We already have a plan to move him through county eminent domain proceedings. You do not need to worry about the details. Elena opened her laptop and pulled the property records for Caleb Hart. What she found made her sit up straighter in the dim light of the hotel room. The 12 acres sat directly in the middle of the 400-acre tract the company wanted. Without Hart's land, there was no way to build the transport road through the parcel, which meant Preston had been planning to force Caleb to sell by any means available. But $620,000 was nearly double fair market value for that kind of rural plot. Why had Preston been so generous with one stubborn farmer when the company had offered the neighbors only appraisal price? Something felt wrong. Elena knew the shape of a man who overpays when he expects to make it back later. She had watched her father negotiate for 40 years. Generosity in a spreadsheet was always a setup for something else down the line. The next morning she drove back to Millbrook. This time she wore a gray sweater instead of a suit, and she asked her driver to park the black sedan at the bottom of the slope. She did not want Caleb to see a corporate license plate. Ruby was sitting on the porch drawing, her knees drawn up under her chin. The girl brightened. "You came back." She ran inside to get her father. Caleb stepped out with a coffee mug still in his hand, the steam rising into the cold March air. He was not surprised. "I figured you would," he said quietly. A person who knows to apologize for a wheelchair break also knows to apologize for wanting to buy a widower's land. Elena went rigid. She had prepared a full presentation on zoning, on community value, on the 300 jobs the new processing facility would bring to the region. All of it dissolved in her mouth before she could speak a word of it. Caleb wheeled her gently into the sunflower rows. In March, there were no blossoms, only green shoots pushing through the brown soil, delicate and stubborn. He pointed. "Third row from the left, 7th plant. That's the one Hannah planted before she knew she was sick. Comes back every year. I don't know if it will next year." Elena looked at the small sprout. She said nothing. For the first time in her career, she did not know how to negotiate. Caleb went on, his voice even, neither angry nor pleading. "I am not selling because of my daughter. Ruby talks to her mother out here, between these rows. If I sell, she loses her twice, and I made Hannah a promise. Ruby doesn't lose anything more on my watch." Elena looked down at her hands, folded in her lap against the gray of her sweater. She asked quietly, "May I just sit here for a while? Not talk about any of that. Just sit." Caleb nodded. He went to brew more tea and left her alone in the garden with the seedlings. Elena sat in the garden for nearly an hour before Ruby came out with her sketchbook. The girl settled on the ground beside the wheelchair and opened to a blank page. "Can I draw you? You have a sad face, but a pretty one." Elena was thrown. No one had ever asked to draw her, not in her whole life. She nodded. Ruby worked with her tongue poking out one corner of her mouth, reaching for a blue pencil, because your eyes are blue, like the sky when the rain is done. While Ruby drew, Caleb brought the tea and sat on the porch steps a few yards away. He did not look at Elena. He watched his daughter work. Elena asked softly, "She isn't scared of my chair?" Caleb answered. Ruby watched her mother sit in a chair like that for the last 2 months of her life. She is not afraid of wheelchairs. She is afraid of grown-ups who will not meet her eye. Elena went quiet. She thought back through 7 years of boardrooms, airports, charity dinners, long elevator rides up to the 40th floor of her own building. Most people who had met her since the accident had looked at the chair first, her face second, or not at all. Even members of her own board. Even the doctors who were supposed to know better. Ruby finished and held the drawing up. It was a woman in a wheelchair, but the chair was drawn like a throne, with a high curved back and little stars along the armrests, and around it bloomed sunflowers at full height. Elena asked, "Why the flowers?" "It's only March." Ruby shrugged. "Because they will bloom. I drew it for later." Elena held the paper very carefully. She could not remember the last time someone had given her anything without expecting something back. She folded the drawing into 3 careful sections and slid it into the inside pocket of her coat, against her ribs. When Elena got ready to leave, Caleb walked her chair to the gate himself. He spoke without looking at her. "I am not asking whether you came here for the company or for the person, but if you come back for the person." Elena nodded. She did not promise. She never promised what she was not sure she could deliver. On the drive back to Louisville, her assistant reminded her of the evening call with Preston Vale. Preston wanted to discuss what he was calling the final option for Hart. Elena opened the email. Preston's proposal was to sue Caleb for alleged water source contamination, using a fabricated environmental report commissioned through a shell consultancy in Indiana. Elena understood at once. Preston was going to destroy Caleb to force him to sell. She did not reply to the email. She called her head of legal instead and said only, "Send me every single contract Preston has signed in the last 18 months, related to the Millbrook project. Every one, including the deleted drafts. Pull them from the server backups. Use outside counsel so this doesn't cross Preston's desk." She looked at Ruby's drawing, already tucked against her ribs. Then she looked out the window at the long brown fields of central Kentucky rolling past. For the first time in 7 years, what she felt was not control and not exhaustion. It was curiosity about what tomorrow would bring. On her 3rd day in Kentucky, Elena stopped at a little place in Millbrook called May's Corner for lunch. The diner had been there since before Elena was born, judging from the look of the booths and the photographs on the walls. May Dolan, the owner, brought out a bowl of potato soup Elena had not ordered. May said, "You have your father's shape around the eyes. Gerald Whitford came through here in 1968, when he was still young enough to laugh." Elena froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. She had not known her father had ever been to Millbrook. May kept talking in that easy country way that let a story unfold at its own pace. "Gerald was my brother Thomas's best friend. They shipped out together from the recruiting office in Lexington. Thomas didn't come home. Your daddy did. But he never came back here after that. Sent flowers to Thomas's grave every year for 57 years. Never came himself." Elena had never heard any of this. She had known only that her father founded Whitford Agricultural from a single warehouse outside Decatur in 1971. No one in her life had ever mentioned a Thomas Dolan. Caleb walked in at that moment, the bell over the door jingling softly. He sat down at the table next to hers. Not the same table. Not far. Just the next one. May called over to him. "Where's our Ruby?" Caleb answered. "Dance class after school. It's Tuesday." Elena looked at Caleb. She spoke quietly. "My father was here once." "I didn't know." Caleb did not seem surprised. He said, "May knows every soul who ever passed through Millbrook. She remembers names longer than they remember hers." May brought out an old tin box with a faded picture of roses on the lid. Inside was a black and white photograph. Two boys in uniform, 19 years old, grinning at the camera with their arms around each other's shoulders. One was a young Gerald Whitford. The other was Thomas Dolan. On the back, in pencil that had almost faded, someone had written, Millbrook, 1968. See you when the war is over. Go. Elena held the photograph between her thumb and forefinger. Something cracked inside her chest. Her father, the man who had spoken only about quarterly earnings and acquisitions and land for 40 years, had once been a 19-year-old boy in Millbrook, Kentucky, writing a promise to a friend on the back of a picture. Caleb said, "You need to talk to him. Before it's too late." Elena looked up. "How do you know he's sick?" Caleb shook his head. "I don't, but you're looking at that photograph, the way a person looks at something they're about to lose." Elena said nothing. He was right. Gerald Whitford's heart had failed into stage 3 congestive heart failure 3 months ago. His cardiologist had given him 18 months at the outside. The board did not know. The press did not know. Elena had not told anyone. When Elena wheeled toward the door, Caleb stood up and held it open. He did not help push her through. He knew by now that she did not want that. He only held the door and stepped to the side so she could roll through at her own pace. Outside, Elena turned back to him on the sidewalk. "Tomorrow night. If you're willing, I'd like to come over for dinner. Not about work. I'll bring the pizza. What does Ruby like?" Caleb was caught off guard, and then, for the first time since they had met, he actually smiled. "Hawaiian. Ruby eats nothing but Hawaiian." Her mother used to joke that the child was half Spam. The next evening, Elena arrived at the Hart farm with 2 Hawaiian pizzas and a new sketchbook for Ruby. Her wheelchair could not get up the high porch step, but Caleb had built a small wooden ramp during the day. He said nothing about it. Elena looked at it, understood, and did not thank him in words. She only met his eyes a fraction longer than necessary. Dinner happened in the small kitchen with yellow light. Ruby reported on her school day, on a teacher called Miss Patton, on a boy named Dylan who had snatched her pencil at recess. Caleb listened, nodded, asked follow-up questions. Elena sat quietly and watched. This was the image of a father she had never had for herself. After dinner, Ruby went to bed. Caleb poured coffee, dark, with condensed milk. They sat on the porch. A soft rain had started again. Elena spoke first. "I called my father this afternoon. First time in 3 months. I told him about May, about the photograph. He cried on the phone. I have never heard my father cry." Caleb did not say anything. He only listened. Elena went on. "He told me a story. In 1968, Thomas Dolan saved my father's life in Vietnam. They were on a patrol outside a village whose name my father cannot even remember anymore. Thomas fell in his place. My father brought Thomas's body home to Millbrook and buried him next to the Dolan family plot. And then he swore he would never come back, because he could not bear to look at Thomas's mother and know he was the one who had lived." Elena stopped and drew a long breath. "My father built Whitford Agricultural with his bare hands, starting with one warehouse in Illinois. I always thought he was a cold man. Tonight, I understood. He was not cold. He had only been frozen since 1968, Caleb said, very softly. Maybe you have been frozen since some day too." Elena turned to look at him. She did not react with anger the way she would have in a boardroom. She only said, "November 14th, 2019. Our car rolled on Lake Shore Drive on the way home from a charity gala. Black ice on a bridge. Adam, my husband, died at the scene. I lost the use of my legs. For 7 years, I have not let anyone touch me without flinching." Caleb did not comfort her. He did not say, "I'm sorry," or, "You are so strong." He simply placed his hand flat on the table between them, palm up. He did not reach for her. He only offered. Elena looked at the hand for a long moment, at the lines crossing the calloused palm, at the faint crescent of dirt under one thumbnail, that no amount of washing ever fully removed. Then she laid her own hand on the table near his. Not touching. Close. She did not remember the last time she had been this close to another person's skin without needing to brace for what came next. The rain came down harder on the porch roof, steady and patient. Neither of them spoke for a long time. In the silence, Elena felt something she had not felt in 7 years. It was not hope exactly. It was the quieter thing that comes before hope. It was the willingness to stay. Elena's phone vibrated against the wood. A message from her head of legal. Mrs. Whitford. We have it. Preston Vale signed a private agreement with Kensmere Foods in September of last year. Estimated personal commission, $12 million. We have the contract and the wire routing through the Caymans. Elena read the message, her face unchanged. She slid the phone into her pocket. She looked at Caleb and said, I need to go back to Chicago tomorrow. Something to do at the office. But I will come back, and this time it won't be about land. Caleb nodded. He did not ask what had been on her phone. He trusted her. 3 days later, Elena rolled into the Whitford boardroom in Chicago. 8 directors sat around the long walnut table. Preston Vale sat at her right. On the main screen was a progress report titled Millbrook Project Phase 2. Elena did not greet anyone. She wheeled herself to the head of the table and opened her laptop. Before we begin, she said, her voice measured and low, there is a document I need the room to see. The screen changed. On it was the contract between Preston and Kensmere Foods, signed by Preston, dated September 18th of the prior year. Next to it was an email from Preston to the Kensmere Chief Financial Officer. Once Whitford completes Millbrook acquisition in the second quarter of next year, transfer all 400 acres to Kensmere at $1,800 per acre. The $12 million spread to be routed to the Cayman account as previously discussed. The room went silent. Preston stood up, his chair scraping back across the carpet. This is fabricated. I will sue you. Elena cut him off flat. I turned over the full email server, the original contract, and screenshots of the Cayman account to the FBI this morning at 6. 2 agents will be in this building in 40 minutes. You may leave before they arrive. Or you may wait. One of the directors, a woman named Catherine Hollis, whom Elena had long assumed was loyal to Preston, stood up slowly. I move to remove Preston Vale as Chief Operating Officer. Effective immediately, 7 other hands went up without hesitation. The vote was 7-1, with Preston the only dissent. He walked out of the room without looking at anyone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt louder than any shout. Then, another door opened. Gerald Whitford, who had not been in a board meeting in 6 months because of his heart, walked in on the arm of a private nurse. He moved slowly, but he moved on his own feet. He sat down in the empty chair beside his daughter. He did not comment on Preston. He only said, "Tell me about Millbrook, sweetheart," Elena told him. About Caleb. About Ruby. About May. About a photograph from 1968 that had been in a tin box with roses on the lid. Gerald Whitford wept for the second time in a week. He had not cried in front of his board in 40 years. He asked, "Millbrook, what do you want to do?" Elena answered clearly, so every person in the room could hear her. "We cancel the entire acquisition. We take the capital we set aside for the buyout, and we put it into a new vehicle, the Dolan Whitford Fund. It will support organic family farmers in Kentucky, long-term supply contracts instead of ownership. No one on that 400 acres gets forced off their land. Not now. Not ever," one director objected. "That is a $40 million write-down on the books." Gerald answered, his voice thin but steady. "We have owed Millbrook since 1968. It is past time we paid." The vote was 8-0. After the meeting, Gerald reached across and took his daughter's hand. "First time in years." He said, "Thomas Dolan wrote me one line. The night before he was killed, I found it in my old footlocker last week. He said, "Don't live like a coward, Gerald. Life is short." I did not listen to him. "Don't you make the same mistake." Elena did not answer. She bent forward in her chair and held her father. For the first time since she was 27 years old, Elena drove herself back to Millbrook, a hand-controlled SUV, 7 hours from Chicago. She did not call Caleb first. She only wanted to arrive. She pulled in at 6 in the evening. April sunlight, the slow kind that spreads across Kentucky hills in long honey stripes. Caleb's sunflower rows were already knee-high, not blooming yet, but standing. Ruby saw the car first. The girl ran down the slope and did not ask any questions. She simply reached through the open window and hugged Elena's shoulders. "You really came back." Caleb came down after her. He looked at Elena a long time, as if checking her face for news. Then he said, "I knew you would come back. I didn't think it would be this soon." Elena got out of the car and transferred herself into the wheelchair. It was a technique she had practiced for years, but rarely performed in front of anyone. This time she did it in front of Caleb, without shame. Caleb did not rush over to help. He stood with his hands in his pockets and waited. That was what she needed. Not help. Trust. In the kitchen, she told him everything. About the boardroom. About Preston. About the Dolan Whitford Fund. About the fact that no one in Millbrook would be forced to leave their land. Caleb listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said simply, "Thank you, not for the land, for driving yourself down to tell us in person." Elena answered, "I have something to ask you, and I don't know how to ask it, but I am going to ask anyway." Caleb sat down in the chair across from her. "Go on." Elena drew a breath. "I am 34 years old. I am paralyzed from the waist down. I cannot have a child the usual way. I run a $2 billion company that is 7 hours from here. I live in a 40th floor apartment in Chicago. I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to take care of anyone. I only know how to make decisions." She paused. "But since I met you and Ruby, I've started to think I don't need to know everything before I try. Maybe that's the thing I have been missing for 7 years. I am not asking you to answer me today. I just want you to know I'm here. If you want me to stay, I can arrange my work to be in Kentucky 2 weeks out of every month." Caleb was quiet for a long time, long enough that Elena began to wonder if she had said too much. Then he stood up, walked around the table, and knelt on one knee beside her chair so that his face was level with hers. "When Hannah died, I made her a promise. If I ever loved someone again, I wouldn't love them because I was lonely. I would love them because they were worthy. Elena, I think I have found her. But I need Ruby to be ready. My daughter is the first priority in this house." Elena nodded. "She should always be the first priority. I would never ask for anything different." Caleb did not kiss her that night. He only laid his hand over hers. The first time, no embrace, no pulling in, just a hand on a hand in a small kitchen in Millbrook with the coffee cooling between them. 2 months later, early July. Elena had been back to Millbrook 3 times, 6 days each visit. She was learning how to push her wheelchair through farm soil, which was harder than any floor in Chicago. She was learning chess from Ruby, who always gave her the white pieces because white went first and Elena deserved to go first. She was learning not to answer email after 6 in the evening. Ruby began to call her Miss Elena, then Miss E. Then, one morning over pancakes, Sister E. Elena did not correct her. She let Ruby set the pace. Gerald Whitford died on the 3rd of July, 3 months earlier than his cardiologist had predicted. He went in his sleep, in his own bed, with a book of war poetry open on his chest. Elena flew back to Chicago for the funeral arrangements. In his will, he left her the full controlling share of the company, along with a handwritten letter sealed in wax. "I lived 58 years like a man running from Vietnam. Do not do the same, sweetheart. Love. Love is the only thing nobody ever takes back from you." Elena read the letter in the living room of her Chicago apartment at 1 in the morning. She called Caleb. She cried over the phone. Second time in her adult life that she had let anyone hear her cry. Caleb said. I am driving up tonight. Ruby can stay with May. Caleb drove 7 hours from Kentucky to Chicago. He arrived at her apartment at 3 in the morning with road dust still on his boots. He carried a small box. Inside was a miniature sunflower in a clay pot, the 7th sprout of the 3rd row, the one Hannah had planted. Caleb had separated it and potted it for her. Elena looked at the little plant. She did not say anything. She only reached up and pulled Caleb toward her. For the first time, she kissed him. Gerald's memorial service took place in Chicago, with 300 mourners in dark suits and a eulogy read by his oldest friend from the industry. But after the service, Elena asked for something unusual. A portion of her father's ashes was to be taken back to Millbrook and scattered across Thomas Dolan's grave. She did this in front of May, in front of Caleb, in front of Ruby. May stood in the grass and wept without sound. By the end of July, Caleb's sunflowers had come into full bloom, thousands of yellow heads across the Kentucky hill, turning together toward the morning sun like a congregation. Ruby ran between the rows with her hair flying loose. Elena sat in her wheelchair at the head of the path, and Caleb pushed her in very slowly, so she had time to look at each plant. She pointed at the 7th plant in the 3rd row. Hannah's plant. Elena said, I want to ask her permission. If she would allow it, I want to be your wife. And I want to be a second mother to Ruby, not to replace Hannah. Only to stand beside her. Caleb did not answer in words. He knelt down beside her chair and took a simple silver ring from his pocket. No diamond. No display. A plain silver band with 3 initials engraved inside. R. C. E. Ruby Caleb, Elena, he said. Ruby picked the style. She told me, Daddy, the ring doesn't need to be expensive. It just needs my name in it too. Elena laughed and cried at the same time. Late September, when the Kentucky light turns long and gold across the hills, they did not have a large wedding. A weekday afternoon in the sunflower garden, with May Dolan officiating. May was a lay minister at the Millbrook Parish, as well as the owner of the diner, a woman who had been blessing small occasions for 30 years. Ruby was the only attendant, in a yellow dress, carrying a small bouquet of sunflowers Caleb had cut that morning. There were 14 guests in total. May, Pastor Daniels, 4 Millbrook neighbors, 3 of Hannah's old friends, and 3 Whitford staff members Elena had ever been close to. No press. No photographs released. A month later, the Chicago Tribune ran a 4-line note. Whitford Holdings chief executive marries in Kentucky. No picture. Elena wore a simple white dress and wheeled herself slowly down the path between the sunflower rows. Caleb walked beside her. Nobody pushed the chair. She pushed it. He walked next to her, the role she had always wanted him to play. When May read the vows, Ruby stood between Elena and Caleb in her yellow dress, holding the bouquet with both hands. May's voice was steady, older than it looked, carrying the weight of every small-town funeral and baptism she had presided over in 30 years. May said, Today we witness not 2 becoming 1, but 3 becoming a family. Love is the work of a lifetime. It is not a feeling that visits. It is a chair you pull up to the table every evening, whether you feel like it or not. Elena looked at Ruby. Ruby looked back at her with solemn eyes. For the first time, the girl said, Mommy Elena. Not sister. Not miss. Elena nodded, and the tears came, and she did not wipe them. Caleb bent and kissed the side of her head where the hair had grown soft from the autumn sun. After the ceremony, a long table was set in the middle of the garden, under a string of paper lanterns that Ruby and May had hung that morning. Caleb had cooked grilled chicken, sweet corn, bread from May's kitchen still warm from the oven. No French wine, just local beer in glass bottles and cold lemonade with fresh mint from the kitchen garden. Guests ate standing, sitting, leaning on wooden railings. No one checked a phone. No one gave a formal toast. It was the quietest wedding any of them had ever been to, and also the most real. Later in the afternoon, Ruby brought out a drawing she had been working on for 2 months. a family portrait in colored pencil, Caleb, Elena, in her wheelchair, and Ruby standing between them holding both their hands. But in the upper left corner of the page, she had drawn a fourth figure. A woman, faint, smaller, smiling. Hannah. Underneath the drawing, in red pencil, Ruby had written, "My family is 4 people." Elena held the paper and could not speak. Caleb laid his hand on her shoulder. He said quietly, "Ruby put her mother in on her own. I didn't tell her to." She decided. Elena said, "Hannah will always be here. I don't want to replace her. I only want to love you and Ruby alongside her. Not instead of her." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "That," he said, "is exactly what Hannah would have wanted." April again, 1 full year from the afternoon on the muddy slope. The Dolan Whitford Fund had by then supported 47 organic farmers across Kentucky, 9 of them widowed. Whitford Holdings had no new chief operating officer. Elena had restructured the company instead, creating a community advisory board and appointing May Dolan to lead it. May, who had never worked in an office a day in her life, accepted on one condition: "I am still selling potato soup at my diner on Sundays." Elena was working remotely 3 weeks out of every month. 1 week in Chicago. She had moved out of the 40th floor apartment and into a 3rd floor walk-up closer to the park, closer to the ground, easier for the chair. Ruby was 8 now. She called Elena Mom E most of the time. She called Hannah Mom H when she talked to her lost mother at night before sleep. Caleb did not correct her. Elena did not correct her. May said, "The child is big enough to love 2 mothers. Don't ever make her choose." One April afternoon, Elena sat in her wheelchair on the same dirt slope where they had met. The brake had been serviced 3 times since that first rain. Caleb walked beside her with a notebook in his hand, his planting plan for the year. Ruby ran ahead of them with a new drawing. It showed the 3 of them, but now there was also a cat named Biscuit, a dog named Thomas after May's brother, and a baby in a wicker basket. Elena asked Caleb gently, "Who is the baby?" Caleb smiled. "Ruby draws a baby. Every month. She wants a sibling." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I spoke with a doctor in Chicago. We have options: adoption, or in vitro with a donor, or other paths. Do you want to talk about it sometime?" Caleb stopped walking on the path. He had not expected the question. "You've been thinking about this?" Elena nodded. "Since December. I didn't want to pressure you, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking." Caleb pushed her chair gently over to a young sunflower plant. He knelt down again and laid his hand over hers. "We will talk about it. No rush, but we will." Elena nodded. Out in the field, Ruby shouted, "Daddy, Mom E, look." The first bee of the year. Caleb stood up. He guided Elena's chair through the soft spring earth toward his daughter. The wheels rolled steady over the brown soil still damp from the morning rain. They did not slip. Elena Whitford, who had once been called the Ice Queen of Whitford, who for 7 years had not let anyone touch her without flinching, now sat in her wheelchair in the middle of a Kentucky flower field with both of her hands open on her lap. One for Caleb, one for Ruby. People had once feared Elena Whitford because they thought she was cold. They had never known. She had only been waiting for someone to kneel down in the rain, to stop her wheels from slipping, and to ask her the one question nobody had ever thought to ask. "Are you all right?"